He always called me before a storm. That's how I knew something was wrong. Because the snow came early that year, light at first, brushing across the porch like a memory too soft to stay. And the phone never rang, not once, not even with static, not even with silence on the other end. Just nothing. And nothing can be louder than a phone that doesn't ring when it should. His name was Jacob Lee Mitchell, but I called him Jay from the day he was born, a name short enough to carry and strong enough to hold. He was my only child, my miracle after 3 miscarriages, the boy who came into the world with a full head of dark hair and eyes that looked older than mine, like he had already seen something I hadn't, like he was here for a reason I wouldn't understand until it was too late. He was always the type to make promises, not in the loud way, not in the look at me kind of way, but quiet ones, folded into small gestures, soft smiles, hands that fixed things before you knew they were broken. He once promised a neighbor's daughter he'd teach her to ride a bike, even though he barely knew her, and 2 weeks later she was flying down the hill with him running behind her, breathless and grinning. When he joined the military, I told myself it would be fine, that he was strong, smart, cautious, that he'd always been the one to wear a seatbelt even on the tractor, the one who checked the locks twice, who wouldn't even drink from the milk if it was a day past the expiration. I told myself these things like lullabies, like mantras, like the spells mothers whisper when they know they are lying to themselves. He called me the day before Thanksgiving, said they might let him come home for Christmas, just a few days, just enough to see the lights, to have my pot roast, to sit by the fire and fall asleep in the recliner like he always did. He said, "See you at Christmas, Mom." And I wrote those words down on the little notepad I keep by the phone, even underlined them twice. That was the last time I heard his voice, and even now, even as I sit here with this blanket across my knees and the window beside me showing nothing but white, even now I can still hear the way he said it, the smile tucked into the back of his throat, the sound of a promise that tasted like cinnamon and snow. I didn't know then that it would be the last time, because no one ever tells you when you're speaking your last goodbye. The days passed slower after that, each one folding into the next like laundry never put away. I kept the house warm, just in case he came early. I set his room the way he liked it, flannel sheets, extra blanket at the foot of the bed, his favorite socks on the dresser, the ones with the ridiculous snowmen that he pretended to hate but never failed to wear. I baked, I dusted, I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. I filled the air with cinnamon and clove, with hope and denial, with the kind of stillness that only comes when you are waiting for something to break. And then, one morning, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. 2 men stepped out, dressed in solemn blues and silence. They moved like they had practiced this walk 100 times, like the grass didn't dare grow where they placed their feet. And I knew, before the knock, before the slow unfolding of their hands behind their backs, before the way they said Mrs. Mitchell, with voices that carried 1,000 other mothers' tears, I knew, but I didn't want to know. I opened the door because it felt like the only thing I could control, like maybe if I didn't, they would go away, and the world would rewind, and the snow outside would disappear. And I'd hear the phone ring again with his voice saying, "Hey Mom, guess what? I'll be home early." But I opened the door anyway, because love will always choose pain over silence. They handed me a box. Not large, not heavy, but impossible to hold. Inside were his medals, his tags, and a container sealed tight, labeled in ways no mother should ever have to read. His name, his rank, a date that didn't match Christmas, a destination that wasn't home, cremated remains, that's what they said. And I stood there holding what they told me was my son, reduced to dust and sealed in plastic. And I didn't scream, I didn't faint, I didn't fall to my knees, I simply stood, because mothers learn to stand. Even when their hearts collapse inward, they apologized, they offered condolences, they spoke in terms I couldn't absorb, and then they left, like a storm passing, like a dream interrupted, and I was alone again, in the house that still smelled like cinnamon and hope, with a box I couldn't open, and a silence I couldn't escape. I didn't call anyone. Not at first. I sat in the kitchen and stared at the note he had written me last year, the one with the little drawing of a Christmas tree in the corner, and a sentence that read, "You better have pie waiting," and I placed it beside the container, as if one could balance out the other. I didn't plan the funeral. There was no body to bury, no casket to carry, no final viewing or farewell to a face I had kissed every night for 19 years. I lit a candle, I placed it in the window, and I kept it burning day and night. Not for the world, but for him, because he said he'd be home for Christmas, and some promises deserve a light to guide them back. And now December is here. The snow falls like it knows something I don't. The lights on the porch flicker but do not die, and the house is quieter than I remember, but filled with things that still hold his breath, his laugh, the ghost of his footsteps on the stairs. And I wear his scarf around my shoulders, not because I'm cold, but because it still smells like him. I keep the box beside the tree, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by ornaments he made when he was small, and I talk to it. Not because I believe he's inside, but because he's not. And I don't know where else to put all this love that has nowhere else to go. They sent me his ashes before December, but I am still setting his place at the table. They said cremated remains. They handed me a box and said it was him. They used words like final and honored and fallen, but not once did they say the word son. Not once did they look me in the eye when they handed over the paperwork. Just a sealed envelope with forms I could barely read, and a flag folded so tightly I thought it might burst into a scream if I held it too long. I tried to believe them. I really did. I told myself it was done, that grief had a shape and I was now inside it, that he was gone, and the ache in my chest was proof enough, but something in me, something in the marrow of my bones, something that has lived inside me since I first felt his heartbeat beneath my ribs, kept whispering that something was wrong. At first, I thought it was denial, that cruel trick of the mind that paints hope over tragedy, that fools mothers into waiting long after the doors are closed. But it wasn't denial, it was knowing, and there is a difference. Knowing feels like a bruise pressed from the inside. Knowing feels like standing in a room that should echo but doesn't, because someone is still there, just unseen. It began with the dates. The letter from the army said he died on November 26th, but the package arrived on the 30th. Overnight shipping, as if urgency could erase the cruelty of the delivery. And when I asked how a body could be identified, cremated, processed, boxed, and sent to me in less than 4 days, they told me things about efficiency, about protocol, about modern systems I couldn't argue with, but I saw the hesitation in their eyes, the slight pause before answering, like they were flipping through a script they hadn't read in full. Then there was the dog tag. It came in the package with the other items, a little silver rectangle I had seen so many times on his chest in photos. The chain always tucked into his shirt, always close to his heart, but this one felt off. The engraving too sharp, too fresh, the chain too clean, and the moment I touched it, I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with metal. I turned it over, hoping to see the little scratch from where it had once caught on a buckle. The mark he showed me when he was home on leave, laughing at how something so small could annoy him so much, but it wasn't there. No scratch, no dent, just perfection. And nothing about my son was ever perfect. He was real, messy, human. He had a scar above his right eyebrow from where he fell off his bike, a crooked tooth he refused to fix, a habit of chewing the ends of pens until they leaked. He was not this clean silver nameplate handed to me in place of a voice. I went into his room that night, sat on the edge of his bed, ran my hands over the flannel sheets that still held the ghost of his warmth, and opened the top drawer where he kept everything, his letters, his charger, a photo of us at the lake. And in the back corner, I found a card, one I didn't remember seeing before. It was from his last visit home. He had tucked it behind an old baseball glove, folded neatly, addressed to me but never sealed. Maybe he meant to give it, maybe he forgot, or maybe he changed his mind. But in it, he wrote something I cannot unsee. If anything happens over there and they say it was an accident, don't believe it, not right away. I'll try to tell you the truth if I can. That sentence looped in my head for hours, days. I memorized the curves of the letters, the way he dotted his I's with small circles, the slight tilt of his handwriting when he was serious. I held it up beside the tag, beside the envelope, beside every document I had received, and suddenly everything felt too clean, too scripted, too convenient. I went through the papers line by line. The report said he died in a training accident, that something malfunctioned during a routine drill, that he was killed instantly. No suffering, no pain, just gone. They used words like peaceful and unavoidable and tragic, but never once did they tell me where it happened, who was there, who saw it, who tried to save him. There was no name of a commanding officer, no signature, just an anonymous stamp at the bottom and an address to a base that didn't match the one I had written letters to for months. I called the number they gave me. The woman on the line sounded tired, polite, practiced, And when I asked if I could speak to someone who had served with Jacob, she paused too long, and then said she wasn't authorized to release that information. I asked again. I begged, told her I was his mother, told her I had raised him with my own hands, that I had washed his knees when he fell, that I had stayed up all night when he was 10 and had the flu. And she said, again, I'm sorry. I can't help you. The line went dead before I could say goodbye. That night I took the box off the table and sat with it in my lap. I didn't cry, I held it like I used to hold him, close, rocking slowly, whispering things I hadn't said in years. I told him the story of the first Christmas he remembered, how he tore through the wrapping paper like a storm, how he hugged me for 5 full minutes when he opened the train set, how he told me that was the best day of his life. And I asked the box, quietly, gently, was that you? And no answer came, because ashes do not speak, but a mother's heart does, and mine was screaming. The morning after, I held that box like a child and asked it questions it would never answer. I woke with a strange clarity, like the grief had burned away a layer of fog and left behind something raw but sharp, something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose, not the kind that rushes you into action, but the kind that plants itself in your chest and pulses like a second heartbeat, slow and sure, and not asking for permission. I started with what I had. The letter he left, the address on the envelope, the papers from the army, the contact number that led to silence. I made copies of everything, laid them out across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces, missing edges, and for hours I sat there, not moving, just reading, again and again, until the words lost their meaning and only the spaces between them mattered. It was in those spaces that I found the first clue. The base address, the one that didn't match the return address on the last letter Jacob sent me. His was from Fort Milridge, but the official paperwork listed Fort Danning. And when I looked it up, Fort Danning had been closed for renovations. The month before they said he died, I called the number listed for public inquiry, got a recorded message, left a voicemail no one returned. That was when I stopped asking for answers and started looking for them. I joined an online group for military families, something I had avoided for years. Too many sad headlines, too many sleepless mothers looking for someone to blame or to hold or to scream with. I thought it would swallow me whole. But instead, I found something else. A thread, thin but real, connecting one name to another, one grief to another. And it was there that I met Carol. Carol lost her son the year before me. Same age, same branch, same circumstance, routine, training, accident, they said, same fast delivery of ashes, same lack of detail, same folded flag that felt like a door slammed shut. And when she read my message in the forum, she messaged me privately and said, yours too. We talked for hours, at first just typing, then on the phone, and eventually we met, in the middle of nowhere, a diner off the highway that served stale coffee and stale hope. And we brought our boxers, sat across from each other with them on the table, like they might talk if we got close enough. And we compared everything, dates, times, names, and the strangest thing of all was the signature dot, or lack of it. Both of our reports had the same typed name at the bottom, Administrative Officer, R. Glenn, but no signature, just a stamp. And when we called the base again to ask for that officer, no one could confirm his existence. No one could tell us what the R stood for, or where he was stationed, if at all, that it wasn't a smoking gun. But it was a door cracked open. Carol knew someone, a woman named Sandra, whose nephew had served in the same division, and she agreed to speak to us, hesitant but kind. And when I asked her if she remembered Jacob, she paused, long enough for me to hold my breath, and said, he was quiet, kind, always writing letters, always humming under his breath, and my heart jumped because that was my son, that was Jay, humming to himself like the world didn't scare him as long as he had a melody. But then she said something else, something that lodged in my spine. I didn't know he was dead. Those words shattered something in me, because if she didn't know, if she hadn't heard, if someone who served near him had no idea that he was gone, what did that mean? What had they told them, or not told them? And why was my son's death whispered instead of spoken? I wrote a letter to the Department of Defense. I used every ounce of patience I had left to make it polite, structured, logical. I included copies of the conflicting base addresses, the unsigned forms, the statement from Sandra, and I asked one thing only, a clarification of the location and circumstances surrounding Jacob's death. I asked for nothing more, because I knew asking for truth was already more than they wanted to give. Weeks passed, no answer. The candle in my window still burned, not out of hope, not anymore, but out of stubbornness, because it felt wrong to put it out, like accepting a lie I hadn't agreed to live with. Then, a plain envelope arrived, no return address, no markings. Inside was a single photograph, a group of soldiers standing in front of a building, blurry, faded, no date, no caption, but in the back row, second from the left, was Jacob, alive, unmistakable. The scar above his eyebrow, the crooked smile, the tilt of his head that always meant he was about to say something sarcastic. The photo was dated December 3rd in the corner. I froze because they told me he died November 26th. And this photograph, this grainy, silent ghost of a moment, said otherwise. I showed it to Carol. She held my hand and said she believed me. Not because of the date, not because of the photo, but because mothers know, we know what our children look like, not just in face, but in posture, in presence, in the way the air feels different when they are near. And I knew, deep in the part of me that had once carried his heartbeat with mine, that this photo was not a trick, not a mistake. I went back to the army, this time in person. I brought the photo, the paperwork, the letter, and I asked again. They told me the case was closed. They told me I was grieving. They told me to take care of myself. They didn't take the photo. They didn't take me seriously, but I took it all. I took the silence, the dismissals, the boxers and papers and ashes that did not feel like him, and I took my son's promise. See you at Christmas, Mom. And I lit a new candle, one taller, brighter, and I started writing again. Not to him, to them, to every mother I could find, because I was not the only one, because silence grows in darkness, but so does fire, and I was ready to burn the silence down. I never thought ashes could lie. I never thought I would question something so final, so absolute. But when grief shifts into suspicion, when the paperwork stops matching the memory, when other mothers start nodding before you finish your sentence, then even the ashes lose their weight. They become a question instead of an answer. And I knew, with the same certainty I had the night he was born, that this wasn't over, that maybe it was only just beginning. After the photograph arrived, the one that showed Jacob standing upright, whole, alive, after the date that was supposed to mark his end, I reached out to every contact I had. Carol gave me a list of families, women who had buried sons or brothers or husbands under strange circumstances, all within the same 2-year span, all receiving similar boxes, similar silence, similar signatures that never signed. I called them one by one, I wrote letters, I visited where I could, and everywhere I went, I heard echoes of my own story. Some had doubted like me, but kept quiet, afraid of being called unstable or ungrateful, afraid of losing what little closure they'd been handed. Others had felt the wrongness in their bones but didn't have the photo, didn't have the letter, didn't have the strength to chase ghosts through government walls. And a few had tried, and been shut down, dismissed, told to rest, to let it go, to find peace in the folded flag and the carefully prepared words of a script read 100 times by men who never knew their sons. But when we spoke, when we gathered, something changed. We weren't just grieving anymore, we were investigating, we were compiling minds' names, base transfers, inconsistencies. We were not soldiers, but we were mothers, and if anyone in this world can hold on to a thread and pull until it unravels, it is the one who once carried that thread inside her body, the one who fed it, rocked it, named it, and refused to let it disappear without a sound. We formed a circle, not official, not legal, but powerful. We called ourselves the ones who wait. And we wrote everything down, every letter, every date, every document and email and unanswered call. We found old friends of our sons who had served and gone quiet, and slowly, gently, some of them spoke. One told me Jacob had been reassigned just weeks before the reported date of death, sent to a location that was supposed to be secure but wasn't on any record I'd seen. Another said there had been an accident. Yes, but it hadn't involved my son, at least not directly. And that names got moved sometimes, especially when things got complicated. And another one, younger than the rest, barely out of the uniform, told me he had seen Jacob after the supposed date of death, alive, limping, injured but alive. He wouldn't go on record, he wouldn't say more, but his eyes said enough. And still, the government insisted on their story. Then came the box. Another one, this time from a widow in Kentucky. Her husband had died in a helicopter crash overseas. They said it was immediate, said nothing could be recovered but partial remains, and they sent ashes in a sealed container just like mine. But she had questions too, questions they never answered. And after years of fighting, she found someone willing to test what was inside. It wasn't human. Bone fragments, yes, but not all from a man, not all from one person. And some were not even identifiable, not as military, not as anything official. And she sent me the report. And I sat there with my own box on the kitchen table, the one I had lit candles beside, the one I had wrapped in his blanket. And I stared at it until my eyes blurred. I called the funeral home, asked if they could perform a similar test. They said they weren't equipped, said it was outside their scope, but offered to help me find someone, and I agreed. And a week later, a man in a quiet office took the box from my hands and promised to be careful, promised to treat it with dignity, with honesty. And I nodded, because all I wanted now was the truth, even if it broke me. The results came 2 weeks later: mixed content, partial human remains, minimal trace, possible contamination, no definitive DNA match, no way to confirm identity. And I sat on the floor with that paper and wept, not just for Jacob, not just for the son I might never bury properly, but for every mother who had been handed a lie wrapped in ceremony, for every one of us who had smiled through tears at a podium and said, "He died serving his country," while the country shuffled papers and hid the facts. Carol called me that night, her voice shaking, not with sadness, but with fury. They had found something too, in her son's paperwork. A name scratched out and replaced, a signature that didn't match, and we made a promise right there, a new one. Not like the one our sons had made, but one of our own. We would not let this go. We would not let them bury the truth beneath flags and form letters and silent phone lines. We would tell the story, every piece of it, even the parts we didn't understand yet, because love doesn't end with death, and mothers do not forget. I no longer look for answers in government envelopes. I no longer wait by the window for letters that won't arrive. I no longer hold the box on my lap and ask it to prove something it never could. I have stopped asking questions that return only silence, because I have learned that sometimes the truth does not live in papers or tests or official words spoken by strangers. Sometimes the truth lives in the cracks, in the soft places, in the hearts of those who loved too hard to forget. It has been months since I received the final report, if you can call it that. Months since I sat with the other mothers and passed around photos and timelines and pieces of our sons' lives that no one else seemed to care about. Months since I tried to convince anyone in uniform to meet my eyes and answer a single question without flinching. They never gave me closure, but they gave me clarity. And that might be even more powerful, because closure means ending. And this, whatever it is, whatever it has become, has not ended, not really. Because I still hear his voice in the morning, when the kettle whistles, when the porch creaks, when the light falls across the table just right, and I swear I can see his smile in the way the shadows bend. I still wear his scarf, not because I believe he will walk through the door, not because I am pretending, but because the wool still holds his scent, faint, buried under time and dust and washing. But there, and when I bury my face in it, I remember the boy who used to hide under the kitchen table during thunderstorms, who refused to eat mashed potatoes unless they had that one spice he liked, who wrote me notes on Post-its and left them in my shoes just to make me laugh. I remember the man he became, thoughtful, steady, brave in ways the world never recognized, who called me before every deployment and never hung up until I said, "You come back to me." I remember the promise, "See you at Christmas, Mom," and I know now that he meant it. Even if he couldn't keep it, even if someone else's hand decided the ending, even if the version they gave me was neat and packaged and tied with ribbons that I never asked for, he meant it. He said it with love, with hope, with the image of home already blooming in his mind. And that alone is something no lie, no box, no ash, no silence can take away from me. I speak his name now not with sorrow, but with purpose. When students visit the memorial, I tell them about Jacob. Not how he died, but how he lived, how he walked like music and loved like fire, and left this world with a promise on his lips that still warms my chest every time the snow begins to fall. When the other mothers call me, and they still do, when they cry or scream or sit in silence, with the phone pressed close just to feel less alone, I tell them we were not wrong to believe, not wrong to question, not wrong to love so fiercely that we couldn't let the story end where they told us it did. We started a foundation, Carol and I and the others, we called it Christmas lights because it began with one promise and one candle in a window. Now we help other families who get the same call, the same box, the same questions they're not supposed to ask. And we tell them they're allowed. They're allowed to know, to wonder, to ache, to fight. Every December, we light candles across the country. Hundreds, now thousands maybe. Candles in windows and on porches and in church steps and in front of government buildings that pretend not to notice. Candles for sons and daughters and fathers and sisters and friends who were promised home and didn't make it. And for the families who still believe that love deserves the whole truth, not the pieces someone else decides to give them. And on Christmas Eve, I still set his place at the table. I still serve the pie he liked best. I still hang the stocking with his name in glitter that he made in 2nd grade and pretended to hate every year after. I still wear the pin he gave me when he was 12, a little angel with a crooked halo. I still play the song he used to hum, the one that makes my eyes close and my heart ache and my soul settle, just for a moment. And when the fire crackles low and the night turns still, I speak to him, not out loud, not always, sometimes just inside. Like a song, only I can hear. I tell him I love him. I tell him I never stopped. I tell him I know he tried. I tell him I believe him. I tell him I kept my promise too. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind moves just right, when the snow hits the glass with that soft hush he used to call winter breathing, I hear him. Not his voice exactly, but something close, like memory, learning how to echo, like a promise that never really died, like the sound of love still waiting, still watching, still here.